Hello, everyone. See people joining right now, which is wonderful. We're going to give people about a minute to get ready. So thanks for joining, and we'll get started in just a moment. Welcome, welcome. Still seeing people roll in. That's great. Excited to get started in just about 1 minute here. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you everyone for joining. So I'm going to go ahead and start to kick us off. And while people are still joining, I'm going to first welcome you to securing a successful AWS migration. Really excited to have this conversation today. We'll do some introductions in a moment, but before we do that, I want to point out some features of the webinar platform we're using. I'm sure all of you are spending plenty of time on Zoom, so you don't need to be introduced too much to the interface, but I want to call out a couple of specific features that are for live events like this one. So there is a section called Q&A. And my colleague Jack and I here are going to be doing the presentation today. We will both be monitoring the Q&A as we go throughout. You don't have to hold to the end. We will have a section at the end specifically dedicated to questions because I'm sure that all of the great and insightful things that Jack has to say will make you all have lots of questions, and then I will at least entertain you somewhat. And we'll monitor the Q&A as we go. We'll answer them as we go, and then we'll have time at the end. In addition, I want to call out there is a chat feature, and I'd really like to call that out right now because if you click on the chat feature, you will notice that throughout the presentation today, we will a couple of times drop in a link to what we call a solutions brief. This will be a lot more useful to you and interesting after we get through the presentation. You can take this home with you. And it gives an overview of the alert logic and mission kind of solution for managed detection and response. And we'll talk all about that as we go through today, but now you can have that to take home with you. And the last thing I want to say is that please stick around to the end because we do in fact have a special offer for all of you who make it through the great content to the end. So with all that said, I think it's time to get started. So, moving forward here. Introductions really quickly. My name is Jonathan LaCour. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Mission. We are a premier consulting partner for Amazon Web Services and also a kind of next generation managed service provider. I'll talk a little bit more about who we are. But as the CTO, I run product, platform, and our service delivery organization. So my teams are all of the brilliant engineers that deliver service to our customers. And I'm joined here by Jack Danahy, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I'm Jack Danahy, and I'm here to provide insightful commentary that will cause you to have lots of questions. I'm not sure if that's oxymoronic or not. So what I'm here and chief evangelist provider, and my personal background is I've been doing security for about 30 years. I don't think I've necessarily solved the entire problem yet, which is why Jonathan and I are still here talking. But I'm really excited to have this opportunity to chat with you a little bit, maybe get some questions from you about the questions you have about security as you move into AWS particularly. I always learn a lot when I hang out with Jonathan and the team at Mission. I learn about sort of like what the specific questions are, and I'm hoping we're going to get into some of that today as we talk with you about some of the lessons we've learned together. So I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, Jack, thanks. It's always a pleasure. So let's really quickly, let's talk about who Mission is and who Alert Logic is. I think that'll be important context. So as I mentioned, we are a premier consulting partner and managed service provider. We are 100% focused on the AWS Cloud. And we have services that kind of span the entire cloud journey. okay, across all four kind of phases of that life cycle, including architecture, migrations, management, and optimization. So wherever you are in that spectrum of making the move to AWS, whether you're already there or wanting to get there, we have services to help. So we're sort of a next generation managed service provider, not the MSPs of old that you may be familiar with. We're a cloud first, cloud native business. And we look to build long-term relationships with our customers and help them be successful on AWS. So now I'm going to let Jack tell us a little bit about Alert Logic.
Sure. Thanks very much, Jonathan. So Alert Logic has been doing managed detection and response since it used to be called something very different. It was more about threat intelligence and threat management back in around 2002. The company has been looking to solve the challenge of really being able to embed intelligence about threat with intelligence about how to gather information and recognize it when it's happened. And then how do you respond to it? How do you help organizations to respond to those questions? And as we've grown, and a lot of our own work exists inside of AWS, we've had good luck with Mission in terms of taking their strategic role and understanding what they're doing as they do digital transformations with customers, and what we do in terms of helping people to understand that security. You know, we'll go through a lot of stats as we go through this. But one of the reasons why I think Alert Logic has been as successful as we have is a lot of organizations realize that their core strength, right, isn't something else other than security, right? Maybe they're awesome at retail, or maybe they're awesome at brand, or maybe they're awesome at manufacturing, but they need some help. And so through the combination of Alert Logic's capability to provide that security backbone and the infrastructure and the capacity to generate those responses, and Mission sensitivity to actually what's going on inside those businesses and those partners, you bring these two things together and you have what we think about as managed detection and response. And we're going to talk about that some more in detail, but that's what Alert Logic is. About 20 years, 4,000 customers, and a lot of really smart folks trying to make sure that everybody stays safe and respond as quickly as possible when something goes wrong. And Jonathan, you're more soft-spoken than usual.
Wow, that is a very delicate way to say, Jonathan, please press the mute button. I'll take it. Yeah, and just to build on what Jack was saying, you know, I think Mission brings to the table a deep expertise around cloud infrastructure and AWS, and Alert Logic brings to the table a deep, you know, expertise on kind of security. And when you put those things together, along with your own business and your expertise and your workloads and your core competencies, it can create some nice magical outcomes. So looking forward to digging in on that. And let's talk about the agenda for today. So we're going to first talk about the key role that security plays in an AWS cloud migration, and talk about why security transformation itself is fairly essential to this whole process. And we're also going to dive into something called the shared responsibility model, which is a really important kind of fundamental to understand about security in the cloud. And then we're going to talk about maintaining clarity around configurations and risks. So this is really about the meat and potatoes of getting to AWS and being there in a secure fashion. And applying best practices will come next, maintaining and improving those controls and security, and detecting and responding to threats in AWS. So at this point, to kind of set the stage, we have this great feature here in Zoom webinars called polls. And so I'm going to go ahead and put one up right now, which is really to kind of gauge interest in how you all are thinking about a migration. So the question is, what is your timeline to migrate? And I believe it says select all that apply, but I think you can only select one. So select the one that applies the best. And you should see the window pop up now. Thank you for all of your prompt responses. I'll definitely share the results with all of you. I won't hold it back. Excellent. All right. So let's go ahead and wrap up the poll question. All right. Interestingly, so just to share with the group, you can see here that there's some of you that are immediately making a move, many in the next 3 to 6 months or even a year, and only a couple of you don't know. So that's actually great. Many of you are on your way. Are starting this transformation, so it's good timing for you to be here. And that's a great transition for us to dive in and discuss how security fits into the bigger picture of a cloud migration, okay? So for those of you who have made that decision, we know why you're making that decision, right? You're making the decision because you want, you're attracted to the cloud because of agility, time to market for new products and services, reducing your operational cost, getting rid of big CapEx expenditures, unique features and services of the cloud providers that you would have trouble building on your own. Things like machine learning and artificial intelligence platforms. Maybe serverless is really exciting to you. So we know why people are attracted to the cloud, but as part of that, that excitement often cause people to miss the big picture of security, kind of being a critical portion here. So one of the things that we have, a data point, is that 16% of organizations report that the capabilities of traditional security tools are sufficient to manage security across the cloud, which is actually a 6-point drop from when this was previously done. So that means 84% say that the typical approach to security doesn't work in cloud environments, okay? So we have great reasons to move to the cloud, but that excitement can cause us to miss the key foundational aspect of security. So what does that mean? Another piece of context for everyone is a couple of years ago at the New York AWS Summit, back in the before times when we could actually gather as people and talk and communicate. Werner Vogels, who is the CTO of Amazon Web Services, he was addressing the topic of security. And I love how he phrased this. I was actually in attendance in the audience. He said, "I'm a strong believer that in these days, security is no longer the job of just the security team or just the security team. I think security is everyone's job. If we really want to protect our customers and our business, we all have to take responsibility for security. And it is no longer the case that when you come to the end of your development process, the security team can just come in and sprinkle some magic dust over your application to make it secure. In the world of continuous integration and continuous deployment, you have to have a very different approach." And so that's what we're trying to say here, right? I couldn't agree more. Security isn't a phase of a project. It isn't an add-on or an afterthought. It is a pivotal aspect of any cloud initiative, and it is especially critical in a migration. It's not just a phase of the project. It has to be a programmatic, continuous consideration. So what does that actually look like in practice? And that's a question I hear all the time. People understand that security needs to be a pivotal part of their entire project, but what does that look like in practice? What are the different phases? So some of the things that can be is a section on security considerations in your migration readiness assessment. If you haven't done a migration readiness assessment, that's absolutely something you should do in advance of a migration, because it can identify programmatic or systemic changes that are required to enable security in your organization, both in the migration process and after you get to the cloud. You should have a detailed outline of your security requirements. What do you want? What are you trying to accomplish? What are your potentially even compliance requirements? And that should be gathered in advance of your migration planning phase. A security framework in place that facilitates those requirements as part of your migration plan. Regular checkpoints for security and compliance at each phase of the migration itself, including acceptance testing, and a documented approach that is operationalized and integrated into your delivery process, including your CI/CD, to ensure that not only are you secure at the point that you migrate, but you're continuously enforcing those security constraints, okay? So that's what it looks like in practice. And at this point, actually, I believe we're going to put up another poll before I advance to the next slide. And I'm really curious to know how the audience is approaching your cloud migration. So please go ahead and respond to this poll. I'll ask that it goes up now. Perfect. So we've given you options here or choices because we know that people have a different approach to how they want to migrate. You can do a lift and shift, which is literally just lifting up a workload out of your on-prem environment and placing it in the cloud with no re-architecture, no additional work. That is a fast path to get to the end point. Maybe you're moving one or more applications, or maybe you are wanting to rewrite entire applications to fully take advantage of the cloud. Maybe you have decided you just want to migrate everything, right? Or you haven't decided. So would love to see the results here. Thank you for your quick responses.
And Jonathan, while those results are coming in, I thought there was something really interesting in what you were saying coming into the survey, which was around that capacity to do that migration analysis ahead of time, right? The understanding of where security is. I'm going to hope against hope that the folks who showed up in the, I don't really know when I'm going to migrate yet in the survey, it's because they're waiting for this to be over so they can figure out how they're going to integrate security into their planning. which is why they don't know exactly when their cloud migration is going to take place yet. Because I think you hit the nail on the head, right? That understanding of how the application is going to change, or how the service is going to change in the cloud, the way the organization is going to deal with them, doing that up front, understanding it up front, makes the rest of what we're going to talk about today so much easier, right? So I really thought that was a very interesting point you brought up, and we ought to highlight it, that beginning of project assessment, that migration analysis, that survey to understand where securities make a difference, super important and a super good idea.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Jack. Good insight. Let's see the results of our poll. Excellent. Well, it looks like a portion of you, about 38%, are going through kind of a lift and shift approach. About half of you are going to be starting with a few existing applications, sort of as an exploratory phase. One of you is being very brave and is rewriting everything to take the full advantage of the cloud. And a couple of you haven't decided yet. So I love this mix and blend in the audience, because I think it really highlights why this can be a big challenge, because depending on your approach, you have to tailor in how that security kind of enforcement and kind of best practices are integrated into your approach. Okay. So one of the questions just showed up in chat is this presentation going to be recorded, and will you be able to view it afterwards? Yes, it will be. We'll make sure to share that out with you as well after the event concludes. So we've already started to talk about why security is fundamental, but let's dig in even further. So the flexibility of kind of a big strategy around digital transformation in a cloud environment can lead to a lot of challenges, right? So we talk about time here. That's a huge cost. The complexity and speed of the development challenges are usually the most expensive part of leveraging your in-house team. And so this is why we believe that partners like Mission Alert Logic can help you accelerate on this front. So we talked about why it's important, and this is really how we can plug in and help, because we can help you focus on monitoring that security and preparing you with a migration readiness assessment, a migration plan, and then operationalizing that security framework kind of 24/7 basis. So security is business as usual, right? It is part of how you do things, not something after the fact. And to dig in on that, I want Jack to really give us an overview of shared responsibility model. So Jack, maybe share a little bit with us about that. Oh, I think you're also on mute, Jack. I gotcha.
I just did that to make you feel better. So listen, the idea of shared responsibility model is something which I think is sort of intuitive to people, but AWS has done a wonderful job of making it perfectly transparent what they do and what they don't do. For those of you who aren't aware, AWS really does a bang-up job in security, right? They have a series of utilities that they provide that can help feed information about what's going on. A lot of the things that we can consume to make sure that you understand what's happening in your security world are coming from there. A lot of the insight they can provide and a lot of the training that they do for leaders, like admission, that helps people to understand better what security means. All of this is provided through the AWS. They're very clear, right? They're very clear on we're going to secure the infrastructure that you're going to run in. Right? We're going to work really, really hard at that platform level to make sure, and the way we communicate within these different instances are all really well secured, right? So that is, think of it as the security of the cloud, right? We hear this all the time, security of the cloud versus security for you in the cloud, right? It's two slightly different things. And we're talking about other pieces, other componentry that exists from AWS that they're providing to us that's very well secured, things like the virtual hosting, the hosts that you run on, the connections in the LAN, et cetera. And so in this diagram, you can see it's a really clear call out of all the great security that AWS provides. Sadly, on the right-hand side, in the lighter gray boxes, are all the things that we as users of AWS are responsible for, right? In much the same way, in my private life, I wouldn't want people telling me exactly how to behave all the time, but I'm happy to conform to social norms, right? Laws, it's sort of like that, right? We own responsibility as people who get to take advantage of the AWS infrastructure for maintaining protection around our own things, right? We're the people, we're the organizations who have that responsibility to our clients and to our business partners and to employees. And so the things you see on the right-hand side are required of us, right? Because only we know, you talk this from experience, right? Or if you're just doing a lift and shift, only we know how it's supposed to work. Only we know who's supposed to have access or how I want to provide that access or how much access I'm going to provide. So these kinds of very custom questions are intimately related to the security. So clearly, that can't be part of provider's responsibility. It can't be part of AWS's requirements because I can't ask them to make those decisions for me. So this is where shared responsibility comes to play. And you can see there's a long list of the pieces. And this is an area where leaders like Mission and ourselves can help you to understand what it means to take responsibility. And just really quickly, if you think about generic terms that we can apply to the way that handling those responsibilities occurs, you can think about it as, number one, I want to be able to collect information, right? I want to be able to collect information as I'm laying out the way my transformation is going to happen. I don't know what's inside this region of AWS where I have responsibility, my customers and my employees. Secondly, I've got to be able to do something, right? For those who are in the midst of this, or maybe it's one of the reasons you're going, the capacity to scale in AWS is huge. And so therefore, the amount of transactions or data or events that you're going to see is going to be similarly large. So not only do you want to be able to collect that data, but you want to be able to analyze it. And as you get that analysis through, recognize that it can sometimes come to conclusions which require some human intervention as well. And we're going to talk about MDR a little bit later, but that idea of understanding how to contextualize what you're seeing, to be able to validate it, that's also part of our responsibilities as users inside that environment. Once we gather that information, it's seldom that a single individual or a small part of an organization is going to have enough information to decide exactly what to do. So one of the responsibilities is understanding, what do I do with this information when I have it, right?
Great,
Shared
great points,
responsibility
Jack.
model also calls out things which are more practical.
So I want to interrupt you just for a moment.
Sure.
So first, I think you're having a little bit of audio breakup. So maybe I'm going to request that you turn off your video while you continue to speak. And I will, while you're doing that, I want to point out something about the shared responsibility model that Mission encounters when we're talking to customers. This is often a point of confusion for people because, like Jack said, you know, I think people, you know, can often have assumptions about what the cloud provider is going to do for them versus what is their own responsibility. And we actually share this with our customers, every single one of our customers, as we're walking through the process of helping them make the migration, because it's important to note what is the responsibility of the provider. They are taking over quite a bit of the things that you would typically be responsible for. But there is a category now with new and different primitives than you may be used to before. And this calls out to the prior kind of data point that I shared, around 86% of organizations saying, you know, the tools that you need now are different than they were before. So Jack, I'll let you, now that your video's off, I'll let you kind of continue along.
Well, you know, I was always told I had a face for radio, so I guess here I am. So in any case, the last piece was after that practical idea that you also have to take responsibility for reporting on this, you also have to figure out how you're going to respond. Right, a lot of the response is going to happen inside that wonderfully container that's provided to us by AWS. But you're going to have to decide, and you're going to have to make sure that things. So I just want to give you one, Jonathan, before we move on to this, which is sort of the responsibility for understanding how things get configured. I like to use it because it's an example that everybody can understand, right? We hear all the time about organizations being concerned with things like the configurations that they're going to be putting out there. And the configuration is one of the most important elements of the way to take responsibility for your own environment, because too promiscuous a connection can allow more people to get the access to the data. A misconfiguration can actually cause denial of access to the data. And so one of our responsibilities is always making sure that as consumers inside that AWS infrastructure, we understand how we're set up and how we're going to work.
Perfect. So I think we have a whole section on configuration and risk right now. So it's a good time.
That was not an accident. So if you think about it, there's reasons why configuration matters and why visibility matters. And I just want to break it down, you know, for the folks in the audience, to these two basic elements. One is called drift and one is called dwell time. And for drift, if you think about how much work you put into making sure that any infrastructure is secure the day you start using it. So it could have been on-prem in earlier days, and now it's up in the cloud, it's in AWS. And so you work really, really hard to make sure that it's configured correctly, that identities are correctly managed, that access is correctly managed, that everybody has the authorization they need to actions. That's awesome. 5 minutes later, it can change, right? Unbeknownst to anyone, many things can happen, right? Another person can log in and change a simple configuration setting. Someone may end up creating or identifying a vulnerability in a piece of software that you're using. So what's happened is what we call drift, right? That without visibility, without understanding what goes on inside those configurations, you can find yourself becoming more insecure over time, opening yourself up to risk. And so that's a really, really important thing to remember as you're thinking about how.
Oops, sounds like we lost you, Jack. We lost you for about 10 seconds there. I'm going to let the packets catch up. There we go.
So
why don't you
how will I know
like
when
maybe
I'm
the
back,
last 15
Jonathan?
seconds? There you go.
Sure.
You're back now. So let's restate the last 15 seconds here.
Right on. I was just talking about the fact that when drift happens, right, it creates vulnerabilities which are preventable if you're paying attention. And importantly, right, I was that 60% of breaches that happen could actually be addressed by having patching in place in the right time. Now, it's a problem that people don't want to patch. In many cases, they just don't have the visibility to be as timely and to know when to get changed. So drift as a function of configuration visibility, super important. The other one is dwell time, right? The other thing we're going to talk a little bit is dwell time. And this again relates to understanding and the ability to see what's going on in these systems. Dwell time refers to how long an attack can exist on my system without me knowing about it. And this is a huge issue, right? Because the longer an attack exists, the more damage people can do. And so what you want to be thinking about is how I identify has happened to me and how I minimize the impact of that. So I think of these the attack succeed if boom is after. If I do a great job in identifying create drift, I'm doing a great job left to boom. If I have the visibility and the configuration controls to make sure that I understand immediately if something goes wrong, I'm doing a great job right of boom, which is dwell. So those are really the two big important impacts of what happens when I don't have visibility.
Thanks, Jack. And we definitely had a little bit more audio breakup for me there, but I think we definitely got the message on drift versus dwell time and kind of why these two things are very critical and important to consider. And I do think it's a good transition point for us to really talk about how partners can help. Let's discuss those best practices. Now, partners like Mission and AlertLogic can help apply best practices and improve security. So Jack, I'll go ahead and let you dive in here as well. And this really builds on that shared responsibility model we talked about earlier.
It really does, right? So much exist inside that gold frame box require a level of experience, generic concerns of security, and the complexity.
Okay, Jack, I think we've officially lost your audio to the point where we can't hear you much at all. So I'm going to pause you and maybe ask if you could try to dial in. In the meantime, I'm going to pick up where you were because this is absolutely a topic that I'm passionate about as well. So while Jack is hustling around to maybe dial in real quick, I'm happy to keep the conversation going. Apologies for that. You know, it's funny as we're all now working from home. I think consumer internet providers are starting to get saturated. So, but as we talked about before in the shared responsibility model, it can be a little bit daunting, right? You look at it and say, oh, I'm getting a lot of these primitives that are provided for me and a lot of the responsibility AWS is shouldering. Well, there's still a lot of that gray that's left for me, the customer, me, the end user. And the nice thing about it is that there are vendors and there are partners like both Mission and AlertLogic who can help provide a lot of capabilities to kind of offload that from you and provide you that support. These are things that have to get done, right, in order to be successful, right? And so it's a matter of ensuring you have coverage. And if you can do that yourself, fantastic. If you need tools, great, we can help you with that. If you need partners and you need that kind of 24/7 support, we can do that as well. So if you actually look at the orange framed sections here, this is where we can join in that responsibility with you, both mission and alert logic, and share it with you, right? And provide you with tooling around threat detection, web application firewall, compliance reporting, scanning. And not only that, we can provide you something like incident response, which is actually a really critical aspect of this. It doesn't matter so much if you're detecting issues, if you're not managing against those detections, those incidents, and then responding in real time, right? And that's a huge challenge to scale. So if you're kind of a small or mid-sized organization, maybe you don't have the staff for a 24/7 team to provide this, or maybe you have a team that's on pager duty, right, and is being alerted in the middle of the night. And that's where both mission and alert logic kind of help bolster you, because we have 24/7 SOC, 24/7 cloud operations team that can jump in and help perform remediations. So I'm going to pause real quick and see if Jack has managed to dial in yet. If he hasn't, I'm going to carry on.
We're working on the dialing in process, Jonathan. We're working on it.
And fantastic. So not a big deal. I'm going to keep driving ahead because I think we're covering some great topics here. And oh, by the way, I do want to remind the group, I see some of you diving into chat and you've been sharing if you've had a challenge hearing or if you have other questions, please do start filling up our bucket of the Q&A section with your great questions that you have on the content we presented so far. Really anything about security in the cloud, your migrations, we're more than happy to answer. So don't forget about the Q&A section. So now let's talk about detecting and responding to threats. So we talked about, all of those responsibilities, and I started to dive into the incident response side of things. So Jack actually, when he had his video on, you may have seen in the background on his wall, he has the 7 tenets of MDR from the MDR manifesto, which is something that Alert Logic really has pioneered, hanging on his wall. So it's something he's very passionate about and something that I've really learned a lot from Jack and from Alert Logic about kind of MDR in general. So MDR is based upon 3 core components, okay? 3 basic notions: people, processes, and tools. And this is actually true for any initiative, but specifically with security, people, process, and tools are all required, right? So together, Alert Logic and Mission are here to provide that MDR kind of capability across that entire spectrum in an integrated fashion. So we provide Alert Logic as a tool, a platform for actually detection. In addition, they have a 24/7 SOC, which is staffed to respond very rapidly when something happens. And that's sort of the management and response side. In addition, Mission has a 24/7 cloud operations team. We're experts in our customers' infrastructure. We manage it for them. And so when an incident arises, the Alert Logic team and the Mission team jump into action, and we do the response side, right? And there are several phases that are critical to response, right? To collect assets, right? So first is collection. Collect access data, logs, events, network telemetry, endpoint information, user behavior, file and dark web data, all of this coming together in one place. And that's what Alert Logic can provide. And then you have to actually analyze that, right? It has to be ingested and stored, and you have to do things like correlation, behavior and anomaly detection. Again, Alert Logic is a platform. This is what they've built out for us. And as users of Alert Logic, we love it, right? And so do our customers. And then you have to validate, right? You have this 24/7 monitoring we talked about in the SOC. And you have to investigate the indicators of compromise to figure out, is this an incident? Can we validate that there is a problem here? We detected something that looks wrong, right? Based upon all of this data that we've gathered and analyzed. Now we have to validate. Then we have to report quickly, escalate to security instance to the responsible parties, and then respond, reviewing the incident in real time, creating response recommendations and performing those activities. And that is a tall order for any single organization to do on its own. So, I'm a big believer that building out your own tools in this regard is probably not the best use of your own time internally. That's why Alert Logic has been so successful, is because they provide these tools that can enable you and your teams. But also staffing a kind of 24/7 team, both for your infrastructure management and for actually responding to these security, this whole SOC side of things, is a really difficult thing. So organizations really do need managed detection and response. And that's something that we together have partnered to provide. So earlier I mentioned the solution brief that was going to be dropped into chat. I would actually like to request that my mission marketing team would drop that in one more time. And it sounds like maybe we have Jack on the line now.
Well, I'm back on the video line because I'm listening to you talk about my connection at MDR, and I'm having a hard time dialing in still. But I had to say, great job.
Perfect. Well, that's fantastic. Well, if you have anything to add on this slide, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to proceed ahead.
Move on.
All right. So you will notice in the chat that we did drop the solution brief, and this will go into kind of how all this works together, right? How does Mission leverage the Alert Logic platform? How do you participate? And how do we all deliver MDR together and really solve for this shared responsibility model of the cloud? So as I mentioned, we do have some next steps and Q&A as well. So let's talk about that. So I am noticing some questions starting to filter in, mission marketing as well. If you see any questions arising in chat or anywhere else, please load them up into the Q&A section so we can make sure to answer those. And I do want to call out that as you have all participated in this webinar with us and had this great information, if you are interested in kind of going to the next step, we do have this to offer for you, which is a free migration readiness assessment. And if you actually click there on that link or type it into your browser, missioncloud.com/migrate, that is a great place to go. We can give you a free migration readiness assessment with a real focus on securing your migration and getting you and keeping you secure once you're there, right? And how does this work? Well, it's a 1-hour consulting session where one of our expert solution architects will kind of sit down with you, talk about your particular workloads, the challenges you're facing. If you're looking to do a lift and shift versus a replatform versus a complete re-architecture, we can guide you through the process and make recommendations. Okay, so the first question that we have rolling in is, I'm already about to start my transformation and I'm interested in incorporating security in the project. How can I do that? So good question. So earlier we talked about kind of a lot of the different activities that are really necessary kind of throughout the entire transformation that you're driving. And it is like a life cycle, right? It's something you have to continuously walk down the path of. So it's not just a sprinkle a little security dust on top. It really has to be integrated. And I'm a big fan of having a plan, having a framework in place. And that's why I think this MRA offer is actually really, really nice. There's no obligation for me to actually leverage Mission for doing your migration. There are good reasons that you might consider it, like such as AWS funding. So we can actually leverage partner funding as a premier consulting partner with a migration competency with AWS. We can actually get AWS to share the cost and fund significant portion of your migration. So that offloads the cost and the work off of you, which is nice. But as part of this process, we follow a very strict methodology. So, and we would recommend that you do the same. So if you are going to take on migration yourself, you're in the midst of this transformation, I would encourage you to follow a strict, strong methodology and walk through the process of securing your environment, starting with an assessment. There are some free tools out there that you can walk through and having and building out a plan. Again, we do this based upon our years of experience of actually walking through, dozens and dozens of migrations. But there's lots of information out there, and we're happy to talk to you about setting you up successfully.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I'm going to try this again, Jonathan. I'm working some networking magic here in the Danahy household, so hopefully this will work out a little bit better.
Sound crystal clear. Crystal clear.
Straight. All right. Well, that's great. I won't turn the video on until I get the answer to this question out. So I think that assessment is really important. And I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why and why partnering with somebody like Mission is a great idea. Because it's more than just identifying all the bits and bytes. It's more than identifying what service runs in what place or what container I want to use. It also relates to the way in which you as an organization are going to deal with it. who should you be thinking about as holding responsibility for things like governance? Who has responsibility for making a decision if something bad happens? Who is going to be in place to understand how big it can scale or how fast it can scale or when you want to start turning it down? There's so many benefits to understanding the practical application of that migration that you can get out of the way up front. I promise you, it eliminates a ton of headaches in the back end. You know, that ability to think through what this thing looks like when it's being successful, it changes completely the nature of the success you're going to have. You may be able to make it through without doing that early assessment, but I promise you, you'll sleep better and you'll have a higher quality output if you just take some time up front to think your way through it.
And of course, I was muted. Awesome, Jack. Appreciate that. That's great. I keep getting zapped. So,
yeah.
Related question. So we talked about kind of you're at the beginning of the transformation. How do we incorporate it kind of throughout the life cycle? The next one is really, when do I do some implementation? Like, when should I put tools in place? At what point is there value to do that in my migration process?
Yeah, if I could,
I know my answer to that.
Yeah, let me just jump in for a second, right? So I think that, you know, because I'm the security guy, people oftentimes think that I like to come in with a great big foot and say, you know, it's now, let's do the whole thing now. But like anything else, it's incremental, right? So think about what we talked about earlier in terms of the shared responsibility model. Think about all those elements in those boxes. Probably one of the very first things you want to do is start thinking about configuration management, right? Because you're going to be setting up the arena in which these elements are going to play. You want to think about how you're going to set those up, make sure that they're secure before you begin the process of feeding things into them. So you want to add security as is necessary, according to the plan that Jonathan described, but as is necessary to support the secure continuing development of what you've got. And then once it's up and running, you want to make sure that as it lands, you have the capacity to see what's happening, the capacity to respond if something goes sideways. And so you can start practicing and exercising that muscle as well. So my recommendation would be, as you work through that plan, as you work through that assessment at the front end of these kinds of projects, insert where you think the security should start, and talk to the team and say, does this make sense to you, right? Is there anything that could be exposed that we're not thinking about? Because let's face it, one of the beauties of this environment is how flexible it is, how quickly you can change and evolve, and how much it'll support you through the course of that process. So just make sure you understand in advance other viewpoints, things that may affect when the security should be added to make sure that as it evolves, it remains secure.
Great. That's, you know, that aligns really well with my perspective too, right? It's not like this big bang approach, right? And that's very much what we talk about it being a process. It's incremental, it's layered. And at each stage, you have to be strategic about it, right? What's the appropriate thing to do now? What's the next step now? The most important part though is having that vision from the beginning that security is a priority, it's a fundamental, and it needs to be baked into each phase. And if you commit to that, and then you action that at each layer of your migration, at each phase of your migration, you'll have much better outcomes. You'll have much better success, and it's very pragmatic, right? You're not going to have this huge cost all up front where, you know, on anything in particular. You're layering just what you need at the right time to achieve your outcomes. So strategic planning up front, really think about it critically, and then just at each phase, those checkpoints to layer it in.
Absolutely right.
Okay. Oh, this question is always fun. I've heard one like this before. Every time we give one on security, this one comes up because I think it's a common thing people really want to know, which is, how do I know when I've done a good enough job from a security perspective? How do I know? Like, what does that look like?
You know, it's kind of like the Boy Scout motto, right? Always be prepared. You know, because security is endless, right? The threats are constantly changing. As your organization evolves, the applications evolves, you hire more people, you expand or grow through merger and acquisition. It's always changing. So for me, it's always, how do I set down those goalposts ahead of time, right? The ability to say, I will be secure enough when I can, number one, feel confident that I'm authenticating what has to be authenticated. Number two, I have a pattern, right, through which I can do the governance of this to understand who gets to do what and how those things change over time. Probably number three, how will I be sure that I can see everything? We talked a lot at the front end of this. even though it's perhaps disjointed in my commentary because of the network connection, we talked a lot in the front end of this about the need for that visibility, the elimination of blind spots. So your security is good enough when you don't have those kinds of blind spots. And we talk a lot about response, right? One of the benefits of this kind of partnership is that you can have response from an organization like Mission that understands how you run your business. So you can ask the question, what happens if something goes sideways of this particular kind? So there's a lot of exercises, right? But you can do a lot of these up front and know.
That to me is the critical factor. As a CTO, as a person who's run SaaS businesses before and had operational, kind of ownership of them, of the security, the thing that I knew when I felt good enough about security was when I knew I could sleep at night, when I knew that, I knew security of any system can't be perfect, right? There is always a new vector, always a new attack, always a new thing to stay up on top of. And the solution to that isn't trying to pursue that perfection. Like you should pursue that, of course, right? You should try to make the system secure and make that a priority. But the most critical thing is, what do you do when something goes sideways? Like, what do I have a system in place? Am I following these 7 tenets of MDR, right? Am I prepared? Do I have the visibility I need? Do I have the team? Do I have the processes? Do I have the framework in place such that when something goes wrong, because something will happen, am I prepared to deal with that swiftly in a detailed way and to have a rapid response that is certain to uncover the issue and remediate it as quickly as possible, closing those timelines? And if I have that confidence, I know that it's good enough. That's a very, very qualitative thing, good enough, but that's what I feel is good enough.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And I would tell you that part of it is, and I see we have another question coming up, and this may touch on some of it. When you mentioned that the response happens quickly, and you also make sure that you're not swinging a sledgehammer, right? That you make sure the response is contextualized so that you do what's necessary to keep the business up and running, or keep the data safe, or keep the transactions flowing. But you're not necessarily like jamming into it and creating more disruption than would have caused by the incident in the first place, right? So having that level of detail and understanding of what's happening, and then having done it forethought, right, to understand how I want to react if something like this happens, really make sure that they're responsibly fast. And at that point in time, you've done a great job in your security, because to Jonathan's point, you're never going to be 100% secure. No one is going to go to their board and say, hey, we're 100% protected now, we're all set. But what you can say is, we're as protected as we can be. We can respond really, really promptly when new threats show up, and we can respond really, really quickly if an attack actually happens to succeed.
Yep. Yes, exactly. It's an honest answer, right? It's not, oh, we're perfect, we've got this not locked down, we know all of the possibilities and vulnerabilities that could possibly exist. The answer is no. We're extremely well prepared in that regard, but even better, when something does happen, we'll be ready. We're ready, right? So that actually leads really well into this. It looks like someone has been building on this and reading our solution brief. So kind of the question is, what actually happens, right? So if you do, go down the path of MDR with Mission and Alert Logic, what does it look like? What happens if a customer environment has a security incident? What happens if our environment has a security incident? What does the response include? How would I be notified? And what does that notification contain? So I think there's kind of an overall way to think about this is, Alert Logic is providing this platform, right? This tooling and visibility. They're doing all the hard work of gathering data and rapidly analyzing it, using technology and expertise together to identify when there is an incident, or when there might be an incident, right? When something is detected, Alert Logic has this fantastic 24/7 SOC, right? And they're staffed with experts. And you don't just get an incident, you get an incident backed by suggested remediations based upon years of experience across many, many, many customer environments, right? And so it's a very clear and crisp, this is the issue, this is what's necessary to remediate that issue. And the beauty of it is, in partnership with Mission, Alert Logic will reach out not to you first, they'll reach out to my team, they'll reach out to us. And we have a 24/7 team of 100% AWS certified experts, right? They are tightly engaged with our customers. We manage hundreds of customers, we manage their environments, and we are intimately familiar with their workloads and their environment. And so we're able to take that recommendation that comes in from Alert Logic, who are, they're bringing that security perspective, that deep understanding of the incident itself, and bringing those recommendations to us for remediation. And then my team are experts in the AWS environment. They know how to action those remediations immediately, right? And so it's two 24/7 teams coming together. And when do you hear about it? When do you get escalated to? We will notify you and say, we're working on fixing it. Here's the full context, and here's what we're doing, right? So it's pretty powerful. And to the extent that we need the customer, if you have a development team or an engineering team, we're finding app level vulnerabilities that are things that we can't action, we will loop them in as well. But the nice thing is you're getting shielded from a significant portion of that. We're just handling it for you, right? Jack, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, you paint the picture both accurately and perfectly, right? And for me, the thing that's important about it is it really falls into the completion of our responsibilities in the shared responsibility model as consumers, right? If you look at all of those capabilities that are necessary to feel that you're managing securely, successfully in the shared responsibility model, that walkthrough that Jonathan just did in terms of what happens when an incident happens, it's a wonderful completion of that sort of comprehensive view of how I take responsibility for protecting my customers and my partners, and my employees when I'm in AWS. So I just think, recognize that may seem like a very tactical description of how things happen, what's in the incident, but it's much broader than that because it's going to cover so much of what exists inside the waterfront that is that shared responsibility model.
Fantastic. Yeah, great. And that was the last question we have. And so I want to thank you all for attending and joining us today. It was a real pleasure. Thank you, Jack. I know we had a little bit of bumpiness there in the middle, but I think we walked through it really well and all the information came across. As we mentioned, this will be has been recorded, and we will post that so that you can view it afterwards. In addition, I'll remind you there is a link to the solution brief in the chat, so make sure you go look at that. And if you are interested in the free migration readiness assessment, go to missioncloud.com/migrate, which is on the slide that I'm sharing right now. You can also call us at that phone number that's on the slide. You can reach us via email if you want to. Smoke signals possible. If you have a messenger pigeon you want to send to us in Los Angeles, that's fine as well. However you want to reach out, we're here for you, and looking forward to helping you be successful in AWS. And thanks again, Jack. Always a pleasure.
Jonathan, thanks a million. Sorry for the disruption delays.
No worries. Thanks a lot, everybody.